And so here are just a few pictures of condensed milk. On the top left, Eagle brand condensed milk, celebrating 150 years. On the bottom left, a very familiar sight, Nestlé Carnation sweetened condensed milk. And on the right is a little doggerel that said, "Carnation milk is the best of all. No tits to pull, no hay to haul, no buckets to wash, no shit to pitch, just poke a hole in that son of a bitch." And the origin of this is, let's say, uncertain, where some historians claiming that it was written by a Norwegian couple in the Midwest who were responding to a competition that Carnation held, and that it was a typical example of Midwest humor in the 1930s. I haven't managed to find any evidence confirming who this Norwegian couple is and whether they actually did write this or not. I have no idea. Now, I just want to add one more name to the mix, a very important guy. His name was Otto Friedrich Hunziker. He was born in Zurich in 1873 and then emigrated to America and finally died in Illinois in 1959. And Hunziker was a very important part of this story because he was one of the pioneers in the American dairy industry. He was trained in Cornell University, and he later moved to Purdue University in Indiana, which was one of the largest land-grant universities set up specifically for the research and education in agricultural science in America. And he set up the dairy program there at Purdue, as well as the American Dairy Science Association. And in 1914, he published two tremendously influential manuals, The Butter Industry and Condensed Milk and Milk Powder. And the condensed milk book became, as researchers at Cornell University called it, one of the core historical literature of agriculture around the world. The manual was an exhaustive step-by-step guide on how to produce condensed milk, from the physical process, the design of the industrial equipment, down to the standardization of the processes and units of measurement. And this publication became absolutely crucial in the 1920s and 1930s as the move of technical personnel and from one place to another, and the movement of this technical manual around the world enabled the establishment of milk condenseries and factories in distant places like China, like Malaysia, Indonesia, and the developing world in general. Sweetened condensed milk arrived in Southeast Asia around the 1880s and the 1890s, especially in the Dutch East Indies. The initial aim was to satisfy the demands of the colonial elite in places where fresh dairy products were not easily available because milk spoiled easily in hot climates and could not be transported for long distances, or the cows could not keep the body temperature within normal limits, which affected their lactation, or a lot of cows simply died from tropical diseases. And by 1883, Anglo-Swiss Condensed Milk Company carved out a small market for condensed milk consisting of expatriate communities in Batavia, which is now known as Jakarta, in Singapore and in Malacca and so forth. And during the First World War, condensed milk companies continued to expand as condensed milk became a staple item in both garrison and combat rations. And in the interwar period, international companies like Borden and Nestlé Anglo-Swiss Condensed Milk Company began to have two primary concerns. First, the possibility of producing sweetened condensed milk and other dairy products locally, instead of shipping them all the way from Switzerland or the United States. And secondly, the possibility of market expansion, how they were going to persuade local populations in Southeast Asia to buy condensed milk. And in advertisements in the United States, and if you look at old magazines like Good Housekeeping and Cosmopolitan, condensed milk was presented as a modern, safe, convenient, industrially processed and hygienic product. And one could put the advertisements of condensed milk under two categories. First, as a housewife's helper, a useful substitute of fresh milk in recipes. Second, as a mother's helper. Borden Foods, for instance, sold Eagle brand condensed milk as, quote, best food for infants and children. There were some criticisms on the safety of condensed milk in the late 1910s or so, thereabouts. So if one, for instance, flicked through the Journal of American Medical Association around this time, there were questions raised by a number of doctors, most notably by Thomas Morgan Rocha. He was the first full professor of pediatrics at Harvard University Medical School. But these criticisms of condensed milk remain isolated. In fact, there were also plenty of praises of the product in medical journals. So, for instance, in Clinical Observations on Infant Feeding and Nutrition, published by Howard Gladstone in 1928, Gladstone claims that sweetened condensed milk is the food par excellence for delicate infants who cannot digest a dried humanized milk even when it is peptonized. And then you have George Cooper writing the US Navy Bulletin in 1928. He argues the problem of feeding infants and small children in tropical and semi-tropical countries presents many difficulties. This is especially so in a country such as Haiti, where it is next to impossible to obtain fresh cow's milk of good quality. It therefore becomes necessary to depend on some of the prepared milk products, of which there are many. A few of these may be mentioned, such as Eagle brand and Nestle's condensed milk. It is the opinion of the writer, after 10 years of observation and trial, that babies do extraordinarily well, or better, on condensed milk than they do on any other milk. Okay. And so on this slide, you have two advertisements, the left for Borden's Eagle brand in 1918, and the right for Nestle's Milkmaid brand around the same time. So you have a feast for baby, for Milkmaid, and the Borden's Eagle brand advertisement is particularly interesting because I don't know if you can read at the bottom. It says you can get a booklet called The Best Baby. This is some kind of contest that they had. You sort of submit data on the height and weight of your kids, and then the kid with the most amount of growth in a certain period of time would win. And of course, the winner was always going to be one who was using exclusively Gail Borden's Eagle brand condensed milk. So you get the idea. In Southeast Asia, on the other hand, condensed milk was promoted in also a very similar way, except the focus was very much on the mother's helper aspect as opposed to housewife's helper. So use it on kids, but not so much use it in recipes. And one of the most vociferous attacks came eventually from the child health pioneer, Cicely Delphine Williams, and her papers are in fact right here under our nose at the Wellcome Trust. Born in Kingston, Jamaica in 1893, one of the first female medical graduates from Oxford University, Williams became an officer in the Colonial Medical Service. She worked in the Gold Coast, which is now Ghana, and transferred to Malaya in 1936. And she delivered a stinging attack at the Singapore Rotary Club in 1939 entitled Milk and Murder. She declared that powdered milk and sweetened condensed milk were major public health problems and claimed that its low nutritional content and aggressive promotion were directly responsible for widespread malnutrition amongst infants and young children in Southeast Asia. Debates on condensed milk and other powder products came to a halt in the Second World War. And then I found the following leaflet, not on condensed milk, but on evaporated milk. Although one on condensed milk does exist, it's just in Bethesda, Maryland. And this comes from the government documents room at Yale University. And as late as 1971, the US Department of Agriculture, the Food and Nutritional Service, and the Agricultural Research Service still recommended evaporated milk and condensed milk, quote, as a good milk to use in baby's formula.